Get off that land, Walker. It was a mistake leaving it to you. Ethan lowered the old survey map. My name is on the title. Graham Voss smiled. Titles don't save deadbeats. Ranger stepped between them, silent, eyes locked on the banker's shoes. Call your dog off. Ethan didn't move. He only reacts when something's wrong. Voss laughed and slapped a red notice onto the cabin door. By Monday, this mine belongs to us. Ethan looked past him, toward the dark shaft breathing cool air from under the desert. In 6 hours, that worthless hole would make an entire bank panic. What if the piece of land they left you with, the one they called useless, cursed, and not worth the ink on a tax form, was hiding enough wealth beneath its red dirt to make the men who ruined you lower their eyes in court? At 42, Ethan Walker had learned that a man could survive war, surgery, sleepless nights, and silence, only to be brought to his knees by envelopes with windows in them. They came in stacks, thin and white and polite, carrying words that never raised their voice but still knew how to take everything. Delinquent, default, final notice, foreclosure. His home sat on the quiet edge of Mesa Ridge, Arizona, where the yards were small, the mailboxes leaned a little from sun and years, and every porch light seemed to know somebody's sorrow. It was not a grand home. The roof needed work. The garage door groaned every time it rose. The kitchen tile had a crack shaped like a river running from the stove to the back door. But it was his. It was where he had learned to sleep again after coming home from the army. It was where he kept his father's socket wrench set, his mother's old coffee tin full of spare change, and the folded flag from the retirement ceremony he never liked talking about. Most evenings, when the desert cooled and the sky turned the color of burned peach, Ethan sat on the front step with Ranger, his German shepherd, resting against his boot like a promise that had learned to breathe. Ranger was 6 years old, sable-coated, broad-chested, with one pale scar across his muzzle from some trouble before Ethan ever found him. He had the stillness of an animal that listened deeper than people spoke. He did not waste sound. He watched, he waited. And on the morning Graham Voss arrived in a black sedan polished bright enough to insult the dust, Ranger stood beside Ethan without barking once. That silence unsettled Voss more than noise would have. Voss was an asset manager for Mercer Dominion Trust, the kind of man who wore summer wool in August and never sweated where anyone could see. His hair was silver at the temples, arranged with care. His shoes looked expensive enough to have never touched a hardware store floor. He carried a leather folder under one arm and sympathy on his face, both equally manufactured. Mr. Walker, he said, standing at the edge of the porch as though grief might stain him, I want to begin by acknowledging your service. Ethan looked at him for a long second. He had heard that sentence before. It usually came before someone explained why service did not matter. Voss opened the folder. Unfortunately, Mercer Dominion Trust has exhausted all available remedies. The property will transfer at close of business Friday. You'll have until Monday morning to vacate. The cicadas shrilled in the mesquite trees. Somewhere down the block, a sprinkler clicked uselessly over a strip of yellowing grass. Ethan felt the air leave his body not all at once, but in pieces, the way heat leaves asphalt after dark. He thought of the months after his last surgery, when his hands shook too badly to hold a drill steady. He thought of the workshop behind the garage, the customers he had lost because pain made him slow, then slower, then unavailable. He thought of the refinancing papers he should have read twice, maybe 3 times, before trusting a banker who smiled like a locked door. There has to be another way, Ethan said. His voice sounded calm, which surprised him. Inside, something old and tired had begun to fold. Voss tilted his head with practiced sorrow. Debt is not personal, Mr. Walker. It's mathematical. Ranger's ears moved forward. Ethan's hand lowered until his fingers touched the dog's warm neck. For one thin second, he wanted to tell Voss about math, about how many nights a man could go without sleep before daylight stopped feeling real, about how many pills could sit untouched in a cabinet, because pride was sometimes louder than pain, about how many years a uniform could cling to your bones after you hung it in the closet. But Ethan had spent half his life learning when not to speak, so he nodded once. Voss seemed relieved, mistaking restraint for surrender. Then he added, almost casually, there remains the matter of the undeveloped parcel near San Aurelio, New Mexico. 37 acres, former mining claim. Environmental liability, most likely. It was not attached to the primary lien, frankly. I doubt anyone would take it from you. He gave a small smile, as if offering a man a shovel after burying him. At least you won't be without land. Land. The words between them like a joke nobody kind had made. Ethan knew the place, the Red Lantern claim. His grandfather had bought it in 2009 at a county auction for $500 and a stubborn laugh. A dead copper site, sun-blasted and steep, with a collapsed cabin, a dry wash, and an old mine entrance sealed by rusted wire. His family used to tease that nothing lived out there except lizards, wind, and bad decisions. Ethan had been there twice as a younger man and remembered the way the ground rang hollow under certain steps, as though the earth kept secrets but resented company. "You're leaving me a hole in the desert," Ethan said. Voss closed the folder. "I'm leaving you what the bank has no claim to." That was the first honest thing he had said. By Friday evening, Ethan had packed his life into the bed of a dented Ford pickup. 3 toolboxes, 2 duffel bags, 1 military footlocker, a framed photograph he kept wrapped in a towel, and Ranger's old blue blanket. He did not cry when he locked the front door. He did not look back when the porch light clicked off behind him. But Ranger did. The shepherd stood in the driveway for a moment, staring at the house as if memorizing the shape of what had been taken. Then he turned, climbed into the passenger seat, and laid his head against Ethan's shoulder. They drove east under a sky-bruised purple by sunset, past gas stations, dry riverbeds, and billboards promising fast cash and miracle relief. Ethan kept both hands on the wheel. Ranger kept his eyes on the road. Neither of them knew that the place Mercer Dominion Trust had dismissed as worthless was waiting with $1 billion secret under its skin. Neither of them knew that red dirt could remember what men in suits forgot. And neither of them knew that before the summer ended, the dog beside him would lead Ethan to something buried so deep it would not merely change his fortune. It would put a price on every insult, every signature, every cold sentence that had tried to make a human being disappear. By the time the lights of Mesa Ridge thinned behind him, Ethan Walker had already learned the cruelest part of losing a home was not the leaving. It was how ordinary the world remained while it happened. Gas stations still hummed under white fluorescent light. A couple in a dusty sedan still argued softly at Pump 6. A cashier still taped a handwritten sign to the window that read "Card reader down, cash only," as if paper notices had not ruined enough lives for 1 week. Ethan pulled into the last station before the interstate, more because Ranger needed water than because the truck did. The Ford sat low under the weight of everything he owned, its rear shocks complaining each time the desert wind pushed against it. Ranger stepped down carefully, shook dust from his coat, and stood close while Ethan filled a plastic bowl beneath the outdoor spigot. The dog drank, then paused, looking up at him with those steady amber eyes that had a way of asking questions without making a man feel accused. "Don't look at me like that," Ethan murmured. "I packed your blanket." Ranger blinked once, then lowered his head again. The small kindness of that sound, water lapping in the heat, nearly broke something in Ethan he had been holding together since Voss arrived. Not grief exactly. Grief had weight. This was lighter and worse, like ash floating through his ribs. He had not lost the house in one terrible blow. There had been no dramatic collapse, no single villain with a cigar and a laugh. It had happened the modern way. Through portals, passwords, hold music, revised statements, deferred charges, automatic signatures, and letters beginning with "We regret to inform you." After the army, Ethan had believed civilian life would reward steadiness. He woke early. He paid what he could. He opened Walker Repair behind the garage and fixed generators. Tractors, well pumps, trailers, irrigation motors, anything with bolts, belts, or a bad temper. Folks liked him because he did not talk over them and did not overcharge widows or ranchers who counted every dollar twice. For a while, the work carried him. His hands remembered purpose. Metal obeyed him in ways sleep did not. Ranger would lie in the shade beside the open bay door, one ear angled toward Ethan's wrench, the other toward the street, as if guarding not just the shop, but the fragile peace inside it. Then came the shoulder that would not heal, the nerve pain that ran down his arm like hot wire, the specialist in Phoenix, the denied claim, the second opinion, the third invoice. Ethan sold the motorcycle first, then the spare lift, then his grandfather's small fishing boat, though there was not much water near Mesa Ridge and less time to miss it. He refinanced the house after a Mercer Dominion loan officer told him it was a temporary bridge. That was the phrase, temporary bridge. Ethan had built real bridges once, surveyed dry gulches and flood channels, measured stress lines with men who trusted a calculation because lives depended on it. This bridge had been made of fine print. It narrowed beneath his feet every month. When he called the bank, he spoke to voices that changed names but never tone. When he explained the surgery delay, they said they understood. When he asked about restructuring, they said the system would not allow it. The system, always the system. A faceless machine with clean hands and perfect memory for what a man owed, but none for what he had already paid. Inside the gas station, Ethan bought 2 bottles of water, a pack of jerky for Ranger, and black coffee that tasted like burned pennies. The cashier, a woman with tired eyes and a silver cross at her throat, glanced at the loaded truck through the window. "Moving?" she asked gently. Ethan looked out at Ranger waiting beside the passenger door, proud and patient in the neon glow. "Something like that," he said. She did not pry. That mercy, small as it was, stayed with him. Back on the road, the desert opened wide and dark around them. The dashboard clock read 9:47 p.m. The air conditioner rattled. Somewhere in the bed of the truck, a wrench shifted against a toolbox with a lonely clink. Ethan drove through the night with the red lantern claim waiting ahead, and for the first time since the notice arrived, he felt something besides shame. Not hope. Hope was too bright a word. It was more like a coal under sand, still alive because nobody had managed to step on it hard enough. Ranger rested his muzzle on the center console, eyes half closed but never fully asleep. Ethan reached over and touched the dog's head. "They can call me late, broke, delinquent, whatever they want," he said quietly. "But they don't get to decide what I'm worth." Ranger gave a low breath, almost a sigh, and the truck rolled east beneath a sky crowded with stars, carrying 1 man, 1 dog, and the last unmeasured piece of a life the bank had mistaken for finished. By late morning, the road to San Aurelio had stopped pretending to be a road. Asphalt gave way to gravel. Gravel thinned into washboard dirt, and the dirt finally became 2 pale tracks pressed into red earth by trucks older than Ethan's bad decisions. The sun sat high and merciless, flattening the world into glare. Heat rose from the ground in silver waves, making the distant mesas tremble as if the desert itself were trying not to cry. Ranger sat upright in the passenger seat, nose lifted toward the cracked window, reading the wind with solemn concentration. Ethan followed the faded directions folded on the dash. 12 miles past the abandoned feed store, left at the cattle guard, 3 miles beyond the dry arroyo. Then north toward the ridge, shaped like a broken thumb. His grandfather's handwriting leaned across the paper in blue ink, stubborn and uneven. "Red Lantern claim," it said. "Don't go near the shaft unless you want the earth to win an argument." Ethan almost smiled. Almost. The land appeared without announcement. No gate worth mentioning, only 2 rusted posts and a chain lying half buried in sand. A sun-bleached sign hung crooked from one post, its letters eaten by weather until only fragments remained. "Red Lantern Copper CO. Unsafe ground." Ethan stopped the truck and let the engine idle. For a long moment he did not move. 37 acres stretched before him like the afterthought of creation. Red stone, brittle grass, mesquite, creosote bushes, and the long, low back of a ridge cut open by men who had been dead for a century. There was no shade except what the rocks grudgingly gave. No water, no porch light, no neighbor waving from across the street. Just wine moving dust over dust, as if trying to erase even the idea of belonging. "Well," Ethan said quietly, Voss wasn't lying about the charm. Ranger looked at him, then at the land, then stepped down when Ethan opened the door. The dog did not run. He stood very still, paws planted in the powdery dirt, ears forward. That caught Ethan's attention. Ranger usually greeted new places by circling, sniffing, mapping every scent like a patient surveyor. But here he simply listened. Ethan felt it then too, not a sound exactly, more a hollowness beneath the silence. The kind of quiet that collected in old places where people had once worked hard, hoped foolishly, and left with less than they brought. The cabin sat 200 yards from the gate, crouched beneath the ridge like something ashamed to still be standing. Its boards had gone gray under the sun. The tin roof curled at one corner. A porch sagged toward the earth, and a barrel beside the door had split open along its seams. Inside, the air smelled of dust, mouse droppings, dry wood, and old heat. Ethan set down his duffel and looked around. One room, one iron cot, one table with a cracked leg, a stove so rusted it seemed more memory than metal. In the corner, someone had carved initials into the wall, along with the year 1912. Men had slept here once, men with sore backs and blackened hands, men who believed the ground owed them something. Ethan ran his fingers over the carving, then pulled away when dust came off on his skin. Outside, Ranger had wandered toward the mine entrance. Ethan stepped quickly onto the porch. Easy, boy. The shaft mouth opened at the base of the ridge, covered by warped metal grating and a tangle of wire. It looked less like an entrance than a warning the earth had forgotten how to finish. Warm air breathed from between the gaps, carrying the faint mineral scent of copper, stone, and something older. Ranger stood 10 feet away, not frightened, not eager, simply focused, his head tilted, one ear flicked. Ethan walked to him and rested a hand between his shoulders. Under the dog's fur, muscle moved tight and alert. "Yeah," Ethan murmured. "I feel it too." He spent the afternoon unloading the truck, toolboxes under the table, water jugs near the door, generator behind the cabin, Ranger's blue blanket beside the cot. Each item looked smaller once placed inside that room, as if the cabin had a way of making a man's life seem temporary. By sunset, Ethan had patched the worst hole in the roof with a tarp and 2 strips of scrap tin. Sweat dried white on his shirt. His shoulder ached with a deep, electric patience. He sat on the porch step, boots in the dust, and watched the sky bruise orange over San Aurelio Ridge. Ranger lay beside him, facing the mine, not the sunset, not the truck, the mine. Ethan followed his gaze. The grating gave a faint tick as cooling metal shifted in the evening air. Nothing moved beyond it, but the darkness inside seemed awake. For the first time since arriving, Ethan understood why the bank had dismissed the place so easily. It looked empty. It looked ruined. It looked like the end of something. But Ranger kept staring into that black mouth as if he had heard a door open underground. Ethan took a drink of warm water and whispered, "What do you know that they don't?" The dog did not answer. He only watched, steady as a vow, while the first stars came out over the worthless land. The first days at Red Lantern did not pass so much as scrape by. Morning came hard, with light spilling over the ridge like molten brass and heat gathering against the cabin walls before Ethan had even boiled coffee. By 9, the tin roof clicked and popped above him. By noon, the boards smelled baked through, and the air inside held still as if afraid to move. Ethan worked anyway. A man could fall apart sitting down. He knew that much, so he gave his hands orders before his thoughts could start giving him trouble. He cleared mouse nests from the corners, nailed a crooked brace beneath the table, dragged broken boards from behind the cabin, and patched gaps where daylight slipped in like an accusation. Ranger followed without crowding him. The shepherd had an old soldier's sense of distance, near enough to be present, far enough to let a man keep his pride. When Ethan climbed onto the low roof, Ranger lay in the thin shade below, eyes tracking every shift of Ethan's boots. When Ethan hauled water from the jugs, Ranger stood between him and the mine. Always the mine. That was the part Ethan could not ignore. The dog had explored the wash, the brush line, the rusted rail cart, even the collapsed shed where pack rats had turned history into bedding. But each time he returned to the shaft entrance and sat facing the grating, ears angled toward the dark. Not nervous, not eager, listening. On the 3rd evening, Ethan found an old survey marker half buried near the ridge and spent an hour clearing it with a hand brush. The brass cap was scarred but readable. Red Lantern, Copper CO, 1881. He wiped sweat from his eyes and let out a humorless laugh. "You hear that? Boy, we've got history." Ranger did not look back. A warm breath moved through the mine grating, slow and faint, stirring the dust near his paws. Ethan felt it touch his ankles. It smelled of stone, iron, and trapped years that night. He lay on the cot with his bad shoulder pulsing in time with his heartbeat, listening to the desert rearrange itself outside. Coyotes called far off, thin and lonely. The generator coughed once, then settled. Ranger lay by the door but not asleep. Every so often his ears lifted, and his head turned toward the mine. Ethan stared at the rafters and tried not to think of the house in Mesa Ridge, of the cracked kitchen tile, of the garage where every tool had once known its place. Shame crept in quietly after dark. It wore familiar boots. It asked why he had not seen the loan for what it was, why he had trusted polite men with smooth pens, why he had come back from service only to lose a war against paperwork. He closed his eyes, but the thoughts kept walking. Near midnight, Ranger stood, no bark, just the soft push of paws against wood. Ethan opened his eyes. "What is it?" The dog looked at him, then at the door. Ethan sat up slowly, pain flaring along his neck. Outside, moonlight silvered the red dirt and turned the old mining equipment into bones. Ranger moved to the edge of the porch and stopped. The mine grating gave a faint metallic tick, then another, as if something inside had shifted. Ethan held his breath. Nothing followed. No collapse, no animal cry, only the long, patient silence of Earth keeping its own counsel. He stepped down beside Ranger and stood there in his bare feet, feeling the stored heat of the day rise through the dust. "We built roads in places nobody believed could hold a road," he whispered, more to himself than the dog. "Maybe we can build one more life out here." Ranger leaned his shoulder against Ethan's leg. It was not much, it was everything. In the days that followed, Ethan made small improvements that would have looked meaningless to anyone else. A tarp stretched for shade, a clean corner for supplies, a trench to guide rainwater away from the cabin, stones stacked to mark safe ground near the shaft. Each evening, Ranger inspected the perimeter, then returned to the mine, faithful to some signal buried beyond human hearing. Ethan began keeping notes in an old field book, mapping cracks, air movement, loose ground, and the strange, cool breath that sometimes rose from below just before sunset. He told himself it was habit, nothing more. But a part of him, the part the bank had not managed to foreclose, knew the truth. The land was speaking in a language he used to understand, and Ranger, patient and unwavering, had heard it first. The storm arrived like the desert had been holding its breath for months and finally lost control. All afternoon, the sky over San Aurelio Ridge had been the color of bruised steel, heavy and close, pressing down on the land until even the cicadas went quiet. Ethan felt the change before the first drop fell. The air thickened. The dust stopped moving. Ranger paced from the porch to the mine and back again, restless in a way Ethan had not seen since the night they left Mesa Ridge. "It's just weather," Ethan told him, though the words felt thin. In the Southwest, rain was never just rain. It was a visitor that came late, came loud, and remembered every dry channel the sun had forgotten. Near dusk, the clouds opened. Water struck the tin roof so hard the cabin seemed to flinch. The dry wash below the ridge filled in minutes, brown water rushing through it with a sound like furniture being dragged across stone. Lightning pulsed beyond the mesas, white and silent at first, then followed by thunder that rolled under the floorboards and made the old cabin answer with small, tired groans. Ethan moved the supply crates away from the wall and checked the trench he had cut days earlier. It was holding, barely. Rain ran around the cabin instead of through it, which felt like a victory too small to celebrate but too important to ignore. Ranger did not care about the trench. He stood at the door, soaked along his shoulders where wind pushed rain through the gap, eyes fixed on the mine entrance. Then he gave one sharp sound. Not a bark exactly, more like a warning dragged from deep in his chest. Ethan looked up. "Ranger?" The dog turned, crossed the room, and caught Ethan's sleeve gently in his teeth. Not panic, not play, purpose. Ethan's stomach tightened. He grabbed his flashlight, his field pack, and the coil of rope he kept near the table. Outside, rain hit his face warm and hard, turning dust to red paste beneath his boots. Ranger moved ahead through the storm, stopping twice to look back, making sure Ethan followed. The mine grating had shifted. Not much, but enough. A sheet of water poured off the ridge and vanished into a fresh break in the ground beside the sealed entrance, where a section of earth had slumped inward, exposing a narrow black seam no wider than a doorway. Ethan crouched, rain dripping from his jaw, and shone the flashlight into the opening. Air breathed out cool against his face. New air, old space. "That wasn't there yesterday," he whispered. Ranger stood behind him, ears forward, body still as carved wood. Ethan knew better than to crawl into an unstable mine after a monsoon. He also knew water moving underground could undermine the cabin, the ridge, everything. So he worked slowly, the way training had taught him. He tied the rope to a buried rail anchor, tested it twice, marked the edge with stones, and eased only a few feet inside to see where the runoff was going. The passage angled downward into a pocket of timber and stone. It was not part of the main shaft. Some forgotten side chamber, sealed for decades until the storm opened its mouth. The flashlight beam shook across old support beams, mineral-stained walls, and a floor slick with mud. Ethan took one more careful step. Behind him, Ranger whined. Ethan turned to reassure him, and that was when the earth sighed. A section of wet clay slid from the sidewall with a soft, terrible rush. Not an explosion, not a crash, but a heavy closing sound, like a door being shut by someone patient. The entrance behind Ethan filled with mud, rock, and timber fragments. Darkness swallowed the rain. For a moment, he heard only his own breathing. Then Ranger barked from the other side, once, twice, sharp with fear but not helpless. "I'm all right," Ethan called, though his voice came back small. His shoulder burned where he had twisted away from the slide, but nothing felt broken. He sat still, forcing himself not to waste air on panic. The chamber was narrow, but there was space. A thread of ventilation brushed his cheek from somewhere ahead. Ranger scratched above or beside him, claws tapping through stone and mud, then stopped, listening. Ethan tapped back with the handle of his knife. 3 times. Ranger answered with a low whine. That sound steadied him more than any prayer. Ethan shifted his light toward the wall, searching for a safer passage, and the beam caught something strange beneath the fresh scrape where the slide had torn the earth open. At first, he thought it was water reflecting back at him. Then he leaned closer. Thin bands of yellow ran through the pale quartz like sunlight trapped in bone, not rust, not copper stain, not fool's gold, glittering cheap and proud. This was softer, deeper, warm, even under cold light. Ethan reached out and touched the exposed vein with 2 trembling fingers. The rock did not care who had foreclosed on him. It did not care what Voss had called worthless. It had been waiting under red dirt, under silence, under a century of wrong assumptions. Above him, Ranger barked again, calling him back to the living. Ethan swallowed hard, pressed his forehead briefly against the stone, and whispered into the dark, "You found it, boy. God help us, you found it." Ethan did not move for several seconds after he touched the vein. In the dark, with rainwater whispering somewhere behind the collapsed mud, and Ranger pacing above him like a heartbeat with pause, the discovery did not feel like money. It felt too old for that, too quiet, too indifferent to human panic. The yellow bands in the quartz had been there before Mercer Dominion Trust, before Graham Voss, before the loan papers and late fees and polite threats, before Ethan's grandfather joked about buying useless dirt for $500. They had waded through presidents, droughts, wars, dust storms, forgotten survey maps, and men who thought the only valuable things were the ones already written on a spreadsheet. Ethan took his hand away as if the stone were warm enough to burn. "Easy," he whispered to himself. His voice sounded steadier now, because the part of him trained for emergencies had finally stepped forward and taken command. He checked the air again, felt the cool thread against his cheek, then swept the flashlight slowly across the chamber. The slide had sealed the way he came in, but not completely. Near the floor, where Ranger had been scratching from the other side, a small gap pulsed with damp air and faint gray light. Ethan got to his knees, ignoring the flare in his shoulder, and began clearing mud with his hands, then with the flat edge of his field knife. He worked carefully, not fast. Fast got men buried, careful got men home. On the other side, Ranger pawed once, then stopped when Ethan said, "Wait." The dog understood tone better than most people understood words. For nearly an hour, they worked like that. Man and dog separated by earth but joined by patience. Ethan scraping from below, Ranger clearing loose dirt from above, both listening for the next shift in the ground. When the opening was wide enough, Ethan pushed his pack through first, then the small rock samples wrapped in a spare bandana, then dragged himself out into the wet red evening on his elbows. Ranger was on him before he could stand, pressing his nose against Ethan's face, his throat, his hands, checking every inch with a frantic tenderness he would have denied if dogs could be embarrassed. Ethan sat in the mud and let him. Rain softened to a mist. The storm moved east, leaving the desert smelling of clay, sage, and something freshly opened. Ethan looked back at the break in the ground. The new chamber lay hidden again except for the narrow black seam and the stones he had placed around it. A lesser man might have shouted. A greedier man might have laughed. Ethan only sat there, soaked, shaking from exhaustion, with gold dust under his fingernails and Ranger's head against his chest. He thought of Voss saying, "Debt is mathematical." He thought of the cashier who had been kind enough not to ask too many questions. He thought of the house in Mesa Ridge, going dark behind him, Then he thought of how many people were walking around America carrying invisible foreclosures inside them. Veterans who smiled too quickly when asked how they were doing, widowers selling tools to pay bills, workers one injury away from losing the porch where they drank coffee every morning. Maybe the land had not just shown him gold. Maybe it had shown him the lie at the center of men like Voss. That value only counted when powerful people recognized it first. By dawn, Ethan had slept less than 2 hours. He rose stiff and sore, made coffee strong enough to float nails, and laid the samples on the table. In daylight, they looked even more impossible. The quartz was milky white, streaked with deep yellow metal that did not glitter like costume jewelry, but glowed with a settled, ancient confidence. Ethan had seen enough pyrite in old training manuals to know this was different, but knowing and proving were not the same thing. He labeled each sample in his field book, sketched the chamber from memory, noted the storm date, location, air movement, and visible vein direction. Ranger lay beneath the table, chin on his paws, watching Ethan's pencil move. "No mistakes," Ethan said softly, "not with this." For the next 2 days, he did not tell a soul. He reinforced the seam, covered the disturbed ground with a tarp weighted by stones to prevent more washout, and locked the samples inside an ammunition box beneath his cot. At night, sleep came in broken pieces. Each time he woke, Ranger was by the door facing the mine, calm now, as though the hard part had not been finding the secret but making sure Ethan respected it. On the third morning, Ethan shaved with cold water, put on his cleanest work shirt, and loaded the box into the truck. Before leaving, he stood at the edge of the claim and looked across the red acres Mercer Dominion had dismissed as a liability. The land no longer seemed empty. It seemed patient. Ranger climbed into the passenger seat, leaving muddy paw prints on the vinyl. Ethan did not scold him. He started the engine, rested one hand on the wheel, and said, "Let's go find out what the truth weighs." The truck rolled toward El Paso Junction, carrying a few pounds of stone, one silent German shepherd, and the first real proof that the bank had mistaken a man's lowest moment for his final worth. El Paso Junction looked like the kind of town that had learned to survive by lowering its expectations. It sat 2 hours south of San Aurelio, pressed between freight tracks, a dry highway, and a row of low buildings faded by sun and exhaust. Neon beer signs glowed in windows before noon. A tire shop had 3 flags out front, all of them stiff in the hot wind. Ethan parked outside Desert Star Assay and Pawn, a narrow brick storefront wedged between a tax office and a shuttered barber shop. The sign above the door showed a silver star against a painted desert sky, though weather had peeled one point nearly clean away. Ranger stepped down from the truck and stood close to Ethan's knee, calm but watchful. "Just business," Ethan murmured, more for himself than the dog. Inside, the air conditioning hit like a cold hand. Glass cases lined the walls, filled with turquoise rings, old watches, silver belt buckles, coins in plastic sleeves, and the small surrendered treasures of people who had needed cash more than memory. Behind the counter stood Nolan Price, a thick-bodied man in his mid-50s with a trimmed gray beard, soft hands, and eyes that moved too quickly for his smile. "Morning," Nolan said. "Buying or selling?" Ethan placed the ammunition box on the counter but kept one hand on the latch, testing. Nolan glanced at Ranger, then back at Ethan. "That your dog? That's Ranger? He friendly? When people are." Nolan laughed a little too late. Ethan opened the box and unwrapped one sample from the bandana. The room seemed to shrink around it. Nolan's smile held half a second, then thinned. He took the stone without speaking, turned it under the lamp, scraped a corner, weighed it in his palm, and carried it to a small workbench behind the counter. Ethan watched every movement. He watched the way Nolan's shoulders tightened when the acid test did not give him the answer he wanted. He watched him check the streak, then check it again. He watched him lift a jeweler's loupe to his eye and forget for one honest moment to look bored. Ranger gave no sound, but his ears angled forward. "Where'd you say you found this?" Nolan asked, still facing the bench. "I didn't." Nolan turned, smile returning like a curtain pulled over a window. "Well, it's interesting material. Old copper country around here has all kinds of mineral staining. Folks get excited, think they've got something special." "Do they?" Ethan asked. Nolan set the sample down carefully, too carefully. "Sometimes it's pyrite, sometimes low-grade trace, hard to move, expensive to process." He tapped the counter with one finger. "I could take it off your hands for 800 cash." Save you the trouble. Ethan looked at the stone, then at Nolan. $800. The number sat there wearing a cheap suit. It was enough to buy diesel, dog food, maybe another month of supplies. It was also an insult so small it almost seemed nervous. Ethan wrapped the sample again, slow and deliberate. I didn't survive deserts, paperwork, and silence to sell my future for $800. Nolan's face did not change much, but the warmth left it. Suit yourself. Assay Labs charge. Attorneys charge more, claims get complicated. Men lose money chasing shine. Ethan closed the ammunition box. Men lose more trusting strangers who are in a hurry. Ranger stepped with him toward the door. Outside, the heat felt cleaner than the cold air in the shop. Ethan loaded the box into the truck, locked it behind the seat, and drove away without looking back. But in the shaded doorway of Desert Star, Nolan Price watched until the Ford turned the corner. Then he went inside, pulled a business card from a drawer, and dialed a private number he had not used in almost a year. When Graham Voss answered, Nolan kept his voice low. You remember that veteran you pushed out to the Red Lantern property? A pause. You may want to revisit that file. Across town, Ethan stopped at a public library, where the computers were old but the silence was honest. Ranger waited beside his chair while Ethan searched for independent assay labs, mining claim records, and attorneys who understood mineral rights. His hands were steady now, not because he trusted the world, because he no longer had the luxury of being careless. By sunset, he had 3 names written in his field book and a new lesson carved into him as cleanly as any scar. Gold did not change men. It revealed the price they had been waiting to name. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday, folded so cleanly it felt sharpened. Ethan found it clipped to the cabin door beneath a brass badge from a courier service, its white envelope too bright against the sun-browned wood. Ranger smelled it first. He stood on the porch with his nose close to the paper, ears low, not frightened, just displeased in that quiet way dogs have when they sense a room has changed before anyone speaks. Ethan opened it with his pocket knife. Mercer Dominion Trust, through counsel, hereby demands immediate suspension of all exploratory activity on the parcel commonly known as Red Lantern Claim, pending review of title irregularities, environmental exposure, and unresolved obligations tied to prior debt instruments. The words were dressed in law, but Ethan knew offense when he saw one. By noon, 2 more envelopes came by email. By evening, a man from a survey company drove up in a white pickup, stopped at the old gate, took photographs from the road, and left without waving. The next morning, fresh signs appeared on stakes near the wash. Temporary access review, Piltikaby zone. Do not disturb. Nobody had touched him. Nobody had raised a voice. Nobody had to. The bank had sent paper to do what hands would have made too obvious. Ethan stood beside one of the signs, the desert wind snapping its plastic corners, and felt a familiar cold open inside him despite the heat. This was how they worked. Not with anger. Anger could be answered. They worked with procedures, deadlines, certified copies, and phrases so bloodless they could drain a man while sounding professional. Ranger pressed his shoulder against Ethan's leg. The dog had never liked signs. Signs pretended to be truth because someone with authority had printed them. That afternoon, Graham Voss called. Ethan let it ring twice before answering. Mr. Walker, Voss said, smooth as ever. I hoped we could avoid escalation. Ethan looked across the claim toward the mine, where the tarp covering the new seam lay weighted under stones. Then stop escalating. A pause. This property may have been excluded from the original lien due to administrative oversight. Given recent indications of mineral activity, Mercer Dominion has a fiduciary duty to investigate whether assets were improperly released. Ethan almost laughed. Recent indications. That was what Voss called a secret he had failed to notice. You mean Nolan Price called you? Silence bloomed on the line, brief but telling. I'm advising you not to remove, sell, transfer, test, extract, or represent any material from that site until the court reviews ownership. You're advising me, Ethan said. Or threatening me? Voss sighed as if disappointed by a slow student. I'm protecting all parties. Ethan looked at Ranger, at the dog's steady eyes, at the dust clinging to his paws. No. You're protecting the moment you realized you left money with a man you thought was finished. This time Voss did not answer right away. When he did, the softness was gone. Be careful, Mr. Walker. Men in difficult financial positions often mistake luck for entitlement. Ethan ended the call before his temper could give Voss anything useful. For the rest of the day, he worked with a restraint that felt like carrying a full bucket without spilling. He photographed every sign, saved every email, scanned every document at the San Aurelio Library, and copied his field notes twice. He drove to the county clerk's office and requested records on the Red Lantern parcel. The clerk, a narrow-faced woman named Denise Harper, slid old folders across the counter and lowered her voice. Banks usually don't move this fast unless they smell something. Ethan gave a tired smile. They smelled me leaving with it. That night, under a hard white moon, he sat at the cabin table surrounded by papers. The language blurred until debt, lien, liability, and injunction became one long chain dragged across the page. Ranger lay beneath the table with his head on Ethan's boot. That small weight kept him from drifting into the old shame, the one that whispered he had already lost because men like Voss knew which forms to file. Ethan placed his hand on Ranger's head. "They took the house because I was tired," he said quietly. "They're not taking this because I'm alone." Ranger opened his eyes. Outside, the mine breathed cool air into the desert night inside. Ethan wrote one sentence at the top of a fresh page. "Find someone who knows the law better than they know cruelty." Marisol Vega's office sat behind a laundromat on a side street in Santa Fe, where the sidewalks cracked around stubborn weeds, and the afternoon light turned every window the color of honey. There was no marble lobby, no receptionist with a headset, no wall of framed awards arranged to intimidate poor men before they even sat down. Just a narrow door with peeling blue paint and a brass plate that read Vega Land and Mineral Law. Ethan stood outside it for nearly a full minute, Ranger beside him, the ammunition box heavy in his hand and doubt heavier in his chest. He had called 3 attorneys before her. One quoted a retainer large enough to make him laugh. One told him mining claims were messy and recommended settlement before even seeing the paperwork. One never called back. Marisol had answered her own phone. Her voice had been low, direct, and tired in a way Ethan trusted. "Bring every document," she had said. "And don't summarize. People lose land in the summaries." Now he knocked. "It's open," a woman called. Marisol Vega was 56, with silver-black hair pinned at the back of her neck, brown skin weathered by sun, and eyes that looked as if they had read too many lies to be easily impressed. Her desk was crowded with files, mineral maps, old survey plats, and a coffee mug that said "Trust but Wrecker." She glanced first at Ethan, then at Ranger, then at the box. "That the dog who found it?" Ethan blinked. "How did you know?" "Men in trouble talk about money first. Men who still have a soul talk about the dog." She pointed to a chair. "Sit." Ranger settled beside Ethan's boots without being asked. Marisol read in silence. That was the first thing Ethan noticed. She did not perform outrage. She did not interrupt to prove she was smart. She read the foreclosure papers, the parcel records, the letters from Mercer Dominion, the photographs of the signs, Nolan Price's business card, Ethan's field notes, and the copied page showing his grandfather's 2009 purchase. Every few minutes, she made a mark in red pencil. Not a dramatic slash, a small, precise wound. When Ethan unwrapped the sample, however, her hand stopped. For the first time, her expression changed. She lifted the stone beneath the desk lamp and turned it slowly. The yellow vein caught the light with that same deep, settled glow Ethan had seen underground. Marisol did not smile. That frightened him more than a smile would have. "Mr. Walker," she said quietly. "Do you understand what this may be?" "Gold," Ethan said. "Maybe. Not maybe." She set the sample down with almost ceremonial care. "The question is not whether this has value. The question is who has the legal right to stand above it and say so." She rose, walked to a filing cabinet older than Ethan, and pulled out a county mineral index thick with photocopied history. Red Lantern was originally patented in 1881, she said. Copper, officially. But old claims were sometimes broader than the men filing them understood. Surface rights, mineral rights, corporate ownership, abandoned status, each one matters. Her finger moved down a page, then stopped. She leaned closer. Ethan felt the room grow still around them. Ranger lifted his head. Marisol turned another page, then another, faster now, her calm sharpening into something dangerous and beautiful. "Your grandfather didn't just buy dirt at a tax auction," she said. "He bought the remaining corporate interest of Red Lantern Copper Company. Look here." The county bundled it as nuisance property because nobody bothered to separate the shell from the land. Ethan stared at the page, trying to force the words into meaning. Shell? A dead company that wasn't legally dead enough. Marisol tapped the document. And attached to that company is a patented mining claim, federal origin, 19th century. Mercer Dominion may have touched your house. They may argue about surface liability. They may complain about environmental review until the moon gets bored. But unless they can prove fraud in the 2009 sale, they do not automatically own the minerals beneath Red Lantern. Ethan sat back. The room tilted slightly, not from shock alone, but from the strange, unfamiliar sensation of a door opening, where he had only seen a wall. So they left me the claim. Marisol looked at him over the top of the file. They thought they left you dirt, they left you title. The words landed softly, but they traveled deep. Ethan looked down at Ranger, whose chin had returned to his boot as if the matter were settled. For the first time in weeks, Ethan breathed without measuring the cost of it. Marisol closed the folder. They'll come hard. They'll dress greed as procedure and panic as responsibility. We answer with records. We answer with dates. We answer with the thing people like Voss always underestimate. What's that? Ethan asked. Maris slid the file toward him. A human being who kept the receipts. Outside, the Santa Fe sun lowered behind adobe rooftops, staining the office gold. Ethan did not feel rich. Not yet, but he no longer felt erased. The courthouse in Santa Fe did not look like a place where a man's life could be weighed against a stack of documents. But Ethan knew better by then. Important things were often decided in ordinary rooms with tired carpet, humming lights, and clocks that moved as if nobody inside had ever prayed for time to slow down. He arrived before sunrise in the only suit he owned, dark blue, a little tight in the shoulders, pressed the night before with Marisol's office iron. Ranger rode beside him in the truck, quiet all the way from San Aurelio, his muzzle gray with dust, his eyes steady on the road. At the courthouse steps, Ethan crouched and rested both hands on the shepherd's neck. "You got me this far," he whispered. "I'll carry it from here." Ranger leaned his forehead into Ethan's chest just once, then stayed with Marisol's assistant beneath the shade of a cottonwood tree. Inside, Graham Voss looked untouched by weather, worry, or conscience. He sat behind a table with 3 attorneys, a silver watch, and a confidence so polished it seemed rented. When he saw Ethan, he gave a small nod, not greeting, not apology, simply acknowledgement that the obstacle had arrived. The bank's lead attorney spoke first. His argument was careful and bloodless. Red Lantern, he said, presented title irregularities. Red Lantern presented environmental exposure. Red Lantern may have been improperly excluded from foreclosure review. Mercer Dominion Trust, he insisted, sought only temporary custodial control to protect all interested parties. Protect. Ethan wrote the word on his legal pad, then crossed it out until the paper nearly tore. Marisol stood slowly when it was her turn. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She laid out the story in dates, filings, maps, and signatures. The 1881 patented mining claim, the corporate shell bundled into the 2009 tax sale, the recorded transfer to Ethan's grandfather, the inheritance trail, the exclusion of Red Lantern from the home lien, and Mercer Dominion's sudden interest only after Nolan Price's call. Each document landed softly, but together they sounded like a door being locked from the inside. The judge, a gray-haired woman with half-moon glasses and no patience for theater, leaned forward as Marisol placed the final certified record on the table. "Counsel," she said to the bank's attorney, "are you asking this court to treat your client's failure to identify an asset as a continuing right to seize it once it becomes valuable?" Silence moved through the room. It was not loud, it did not have to be. Voss looked down at his hands. For the first time since Ethan had met him, the man seemed less like a machine and more like someone trapped inside one of his own forms. The ruling did not come with music, tears, or thunder. It came in plain language. Mercer Dominion's emergency request was denied. Ethan Walker retained control of the Red Lantern mineral rights pending standard regulatory review. The court referred certain representations by the bank for further examination. Marisol touched Ethan's sleeve under the table, just once. Ethan did not smile right away. He sat still, feeling the words pass through him slowly as if his body did not yet trust good news. Outside, Ranger rose before Ethan reached the door. The dog knew from the shape of his walk. Ethan knelt on the courthouse steps, and Ranger pressed into him with such quiet force that people passing by turned their heads, then looked away with the respectful embarrassment reserved for private miracles. Months later, the first independent valuation placed Red Lantern's recoverable reserves near $1.1 billion. A number so large Ethan could not hold it in his mind without feeling it belonged to someone else. He did not sell the land outright. He signed a controlled mining agreement with strict water protections, reclamation bonds, independent safety oversight, and an 18% gross royalty that made financial reporters call him lucky. Ethan disliked that word. Luck had not read the records. Luck had not slept on a cot beside a dangerous mine. Luck had not listened when a dog heard the earth breathe. 1 year after the ruling, the old Mercer Dominion branch in Mesa Ridge closed quietly after a federal settlement, and bad press made its name taste sour in town. Ethan bought the building through a trust. People expected him to tear it down out of anger. Instead, he kept the foundation, opened the walls, filled the lobby with daylight, and built the Ranger House Veterans and Community Center. There were legal aid offices where loan papers could be explained before they became traps. There were counseling rooms for veterans who had learned to say, "I'm fine," so well, nobody heard the plea inside it. There was a clinic partnership for workers recovering from injuries, and a small training yard where rescued German shepherds learned to become service companions. Above the entrance, carved into desert stone, were the words Ethan chose himself. No human being is a bad debt. On opening day, Ethan stood near the doorway while Ranger, older now but still noble, lay in the shade beside him. Men and women came through quietly at first, carrying folders, canes, uniforms folded in bags, medical bills, mortgage notices, and the exhausted dignity of people who had been ashamed for too long. Ethan shook every hand. He looked every person in the eye. By sunset, the building glowed warm against the Arizona sky. Not like a bank, not like a monument, but like a porch light left on for someone coming home. Far away in New Mexico, machines worked carefully beneath Red Lantern Ridge, their low vibration traveling through stone and time. Ethan no longer heard the sound as a mine waking. He heard it as proof. The ground had remembered what the powerful forgot. Value is not always visible from the surface, and a person discarded by the world may still be carrying enough light to change it. If this story moved you, leave a like and subscribe for more stories about loyalty, second chances, and the quiet strength people carry when the world stops seeing them. Which moment stayed with you the most, and where are you watching from? Share it in the comments.